You are listening to Fox Radio 910 and 104.3. Welcome to Front Porch Tales, sponsored by Crowning Touch Senior Moving Services of Roanoke, Virginia. My name is Linda Balentine, the president of Crowning Touch and your host for this series. I travel into the mountains to interview the people of Appalachia and collect their share of memories. So now, we invite you to sit a spell with us and listen to stories, both historical and current, that emanate from the heart of Appalachia. Well, here we are with Tony Tree again, because we still have some more tales to tell you from the front porch of Appalachia. And I'm going to just ask Tony to kick right off with his story about, he's got a good story. Is this the story about Sweet Pea? Is that the story that you're going to tell with the Wilfongs?
That comes toward the end.
Okay, well then why don't you just launch, and then I've got a little story that I'm going to tell about what it's like to...
But now it's a disgusting story. I don't know if you allow uncensored
well,
material.
there's no, it's not misinformation. It's not disinformation. It's okay.
It's real. It's
real, and
it's
I
autobiographical.
Approve. I approve. And then I'm going to share a story. The latter half of this, I'm going to share a story about what it's like to give birth in the mountains, because I have a great story that propelled me into midwifery. So you go ahead, Tony. You kick off.
Well, first of all, it's good to be here again with you, Linda. It's good to be here with the people that listen. I hope that everything that we do and say has been a blessing to you, to really get to know our mountains better, and not just our mountains, but the people of our country, the people in our neighborhoods. That people are precious, and we have many ties and contacts, and we, let's embrace and love one another, because that's what we used to do as hippies. We didn't know that we were being good. We just appreciated people.
That's right.
And love people.
It's a rich fabric. It's a rich tapestry we all weave one to another.
Yes, it is.
And that's and the pattern and the color has yet to be revealed, but it's rich and exciting in the weaving.
Well, I got something exciting for you today.
Okay.
You asked me a couple of programs ago, a long time ago, how I got to Virginia, and I said I was driving through Mullinax store. Well, somehow I had to get from New York City to Mullinax store, and that's what I'm going to tell you about now.
Okay, good. How did that happen?
In New York City, after I worked for several years in anti-poverty programs for the Puerto Rican Community Development Project, which is all good, I developed something called tuberculosis, and the doctors told me I couldn't work anymore. They put me on a 6-month regimen. Well, that 6 months regimen led me to not want to go back to work, because during those 6 months, I was out doing social work downtown.
Wow.
With different hippie organizations, but I wasn't a hippie.
Right, gotcha.
I just wanted to help people, and get that stuff together. So little by little, I became a hippie. And after the 6 months of the TB regimen pills, I did not want to go back to work, because my life was busy at that point the way I liked it.
Yeah, you were working, you just weren't working under somebody else's program.
Exactly. Well, and what I do for food is I found, I didn't take advantage, but there was a restaurant on East 2nd Street. This is in the village, in East Village.
Right.
Okay. It was called the Paradox, and it was a hippie restaurant. And if you didn't have money, you went in there. They had long wooden tables. This is New York City in 1970. All right, this was a long time ago. And you asked them first, do you have dishes to wash, or can I clean the floors for some food? They said, okay, well, we got somebody doing this. You can do the dishes tonight if you want. And if you committed to doing that, you were fed like a king.
Wow.
And then you just completed what you needed to do. Things were different back then, the way people interacted.
That's right.
I also had a part-time job to buy food at a place called The Good Earth, and that was between 2nd and 3rd Street on
I've heard
2nd
of The Good
Avenue.
Earth. That was that had a real reputation.
Yes, it did.
It
and it was
stretched
a hole
way
in the
beyond
wall.
New York City.
Yeah, eventually, they did.
Mm-hmm.
The Good Earth.
Yep.
Well, I went to the Good Earth, and I got to know the people. And they said, yeah, you can work here. Let's set up your hours, because some days we ain't going to need help. I said, that's fine. That fits my job. Nothing steady, nothing on paper, nothing fixed. I am flexible. And I wish I still could be like that. But that's
Belonged to another season.
That's another season.
That was a season.
Well, I'm working there, and I was there for maybe 2, 3, 4, 5 times. I don't remember how many times. And in come this hippie couple, short, blonde, almost white hair, young lady, beautiful lady, probably no taller than my mother. My mother can walk underneath my arms. That's how short she was. And this lady's man, I didn't know if they were married or not, but he was as tall as me, maybe an inch or two taller, long shaggy hair, and boy, did he look like a hippie.
Uh-huh.
And they came in and they were shopping in the store, and I was intrigued because I really wasn't a hippie yet.
Yeah.
I was a
were
hippie in waiting.
These were people of interest. You were a hippie in the wings.
Yeah. Well, I got to talk to them and where they're from. I thought they were from one of the communes right around New York City. I was excited because I wanted to visit communes. And he said, well, my name is Norman Wilfong, and this is Ellen. I said, oh, cool. Are you from New York State? He said, no, we're from Virginia. I said, you're from Virginia? Oh, wow, I've never been to Virginia. And he said, well, you'll have to come down and visit. I said, well, I want to live in a teepee. I want to go in the woods. I want to do something really crazy because I was crazy at the time.
Yeah.
And he said, well, you can go down and do it there. I said, we live in the country. Oh, my gosh. When you tell me that they live in the country and that I can go there, I said, ma'am, I'm packing up. I'm getting out of Dodge.
And what a serendipity, because I did come to know Norm and Ellen, and how neat that is that you met them in New York City.
Yes.
And they were in Sugar Grove. Now, was that West Virginia?
Yes.
It was. So they were just right over the line.
Yes, right over the line.
Right over in the line
Yeah.
of West Virginia.
You go to Franklin, and then you go over, I guess, one
mountain.
ridge.
Mm-hmm.
You don't continue to Stanton. If you did, you get to Stanton. But they lived in a small community.
That's right.
Beautiful community.
Precious community.
And
Very
precious
small.
people.
That's correct.
Everything to me at the time was so fascinating because, you're young, you're full of vibrancy, and the world looks like anything is possible, including fixing it up. And the political situation was so bad. Everybody was dissatisfied, wondering. So the whole hippie movement was vital.
So this
for
was
survival.
in the early 70s that this was happening,
Yes.
like 72, something
Not
like that.
70.
Oh, was it 70? Okay. Something like that.
71-ish.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So I get his name and his address. I said, you sure it's okay to come and visit?
Oh, wow.
He said, yeah. So at the time, we didn't have Facebook. We didn't have FaceTime. So I actually wrote them a letter and said, can I come down and so-and-so? I want to see what it's like. They said, sure, come on down. So I packed up my dog, packed up my belongings, my dog, the one that left me high and dry in the mountains from another story. Sweet Pea. Yeah. And we came down to Norm and Ellen's house in Sugar Grove. And I was just enthralled at the whole, I'd never been in the country before.
Wow.
Real country. I've been in, countrified people, but not in the mountains.
Right.
And I was totally fascinated. Absolutely fascinated. So I stayed there for a couple of days with them. I don't know who their guests were, but they had a guest that had a little baby. And I didn't know that dogs do what they do, but evidently they had changed the baby's diaper, and it was a really, really bad number 2. And I don't know where they threw the diaper, but when I come to realize what my darling dog Sweepy was doing, she had drugged the diaper out somewhere, and she had consumed, not only did she consume that, but jumped back in the vehicle that I was in and threw up all over the place.
Oh, no. And those were cloth diapers, we might add.
They were
so
cloth
this was
diapers.
before Pampers and Huggies. I mean, they had them, but, the mountain people didn't buy those. And I know Ellen, she used cloth diapers, and that was it.
Well, that was the last time I knew that I would never love a dog and I would never have a dog. But that all changed in a couple of days,
Yeah, I'm surprised you didn't rule out, and I would never have a baby, and I would never. I'm surprised you didn't take it a little further.
No, dogs are dogs.
Yes, and by the way,
And I've come to realize that.
Didn't you end up having 5 children?
Yes.
Yes, see, so, it didn't deter you, didn't turn you off too much.
No, I love children. I wish I could still have more. I wish I could raise more. I wish I could be foster parent, whatever, but everything's so complicated now.
That's correct.
That, if you don't have this facility and that facility, when I lived in Puerto Rico, even when I went to high school, we used latrines. In high school, we had latrines. We didn't have a flush toilet.
Right, I got
And,
you.
and so, but today you have to have so much according to standards
You have to have
and
a
health
certain amount of
codes.
square footage if you have one child, and more square footage if you need a second child. They
Yeah.
don't even do it the way America actually developed and raised all those generations, where you would pile 4 and 5 kids.
Right.
In Appalachia, you would have 3 kids or 4 kids in a bed, even if they
Yes.
had to sleep across the bed.
Yep.
And that's just what they did. They did what they, had to do. And
That's
some of
it.
those, and they had strong foundations, those children.
Yeah.
A lot of them had very, very strong foundations. So it's not the square footage that the child needs.
Yeah. Norm and Ellen were extremely congenial folks, and I did a lot with them because they were my contact, even though I moved over to bluegrass, because I found bluegrass in that other story.
Right.
But we used to hang out in Franklin. We would have suppers, a lot of suppers. The folks that owned the funeral home in Franklin, I don't know what the name of the funeral home was, right there when you enter Franklin,
Yeah.
their son, he wasn't a hippie, but he sure partied with us.
Aw.
And we loved him. And it was like, this is really cool. We're partying on the grounds of the funeral home. They didn't have anybody dead inside, so it was okay. And we eat, we prepare foods and stuff.
Right.
I have one picture. I didn't bring it with me, but I'll bring it next time. I'll show you us sitting around the yard at the
wow.
funeral home. Fitz is in there. Norm is in there. I don't see Ellen in the picture.
Wow, I've got to see that picture. I would love that.
I'll bring that.
I have a old lard tin full of pictures of the good old days. And you remember what a lard tin was? About a
Yes.
5-gallon deal.
Oh, yeah.
And it's stuffed to the brim of old pictures. And in those days, you would take pictures, and then, a few people, it was hard to get them developed, and it was costly, and, but
Yeah.
But we've got some, but we don't have the plethora of them that people have now with digital cameras, which makes them even more treasured. But they're safe and sound in there, so I'll go through those for you.
Yep.
But can I add to that story of Norm and
Absolutely.
Ellen? I've got a little
Absolutely.
story. The way I met Ellen was that she and I, back in the day, the nearest hospital was an hour and a half away. And I met Ellen because she was in a Lamaze class, which teaches you how to have a natural birth without drugs. So we were all the back to the nature mamas. And we used to go on over, every week. We would go on over and have this Lamaze class. And when it came time for the baby to be born, I was more than ready to get up and, try and make it over there, because it was all new age stuff. And the hospitals were loosening their grip on, the mother-child relationship, and trying not to be as interruptive as they normally had been. And so they didn't steal the baby away from you, and you could have the baby right afterwards. And it didn't sound like such a bad deal. But when it came time for me to give birth, my river was flooding. It was a full noon night, but it was stormy. It had just been stormy. And actually, it was really raining like cats and dogs when we went out. The full moon came out when we were coming back. But we made it across. Didn't know if we could make it across the river, but we did. We made it across the river. And then we had another truck parked over there. We had that. It was actually a 1949 Chevy truck that carried us up and down with the steel bed. Do you remember that? We used to
let me interrupt you for just 1 second,
Yeah.
because the people that are listening to this broadcast don't know that to visit our dear friends, to do anything with Billsy and Linda, you had to cross a river in your vehicle. And sometimes that was scary, because you didn't know if there was a new hole that had developed since the last flood,
right.
and the rain washed through, and you had to drive sideways and watch where the rocks are.
You had to start upriver because you would get washed downriver.
Exactly. But that's where Billsy and Linda live. So it's nice that we're still alive to tell these stories.
That's right.
On
It was
radio.
real adventure. And we did lose a truck in there and came out one morning. There was nothing left but the rooster tail, but that's another story. So anyway, we got in the truck and we were headed down, and it really was, by now, it was really pouring the rain down. And it was like a grade B movie, because I kept telling my husband, this was our first baby, and I kept telling him, we're not going to make it. I can feel this baby coming. And so at one point, he jumped out. Now, those were the days of phone booths, and there was a phone booth on the corner of downtown where, the road that came over from Harrisonburg, wasn't 250, but whatever that road, I forget. Anyway, so he he got on out, and he was so nervous as a first dad. And he was trying to call the doctor, and he couldn't find the number. And so then he left the phone booth. A car was coming, towards us with its lights on in the pouring rain. And he goes out and waves his arms like a maniac and beats on the hood of the car and screams at the guy and says, "My wife is having a baby. Where's Dr. I's office?" And so he said, "Well, follow me." So he tears on up the mountain. We go on up the mountain, and we get to Dr. I's house. And my husband knocks on the door. And he says, "Well, bring her on in, and we'll examine her." And so they take me on in, and then they say, "Oh, you're okay. You're only 7 centimeters dilated. You've got plenty of time. I'll call the hospital and tell them you're coming." Well, that makes no difference at all. And I went to get up into the truck, and I could feel the baby drop even more. And so I said to my husband, "Listen, there's a doctor here. I'm not getting in the truck and having a baby on the top." And we're still over an hour away. I said, "I'm not having this baby on the top of the mountain in the rain in the front seat of a pickup truck. I'm not doing that." So I said, "You have to go back and tell him that I'm not leaving. I'm just not going to leave." So Bill's knocking on the door. Now, here's what I didn't know. Dr. I had a friend there. They were drunk as skunks. They had been playing golf all day, and he had a cheap surgeon who was also with him in there. And I could hear them through the garage door that was open, and I could hear the other surgeon say, "Oh, come on, Luke, I ain't never delivered a baby in 30 years. Let's just go ahead." And you could just hear they were just drunk and laughing. And so they said, "Well, just go on down to my office. We'll meet you down there." So we drove on back down the hill, and there was his office. And I went on in and got up on the table. And of course, he strapped some gas mask thing on my arm, and I wasn't going to use it. He said, "Just use this." Meanwhile, they're telling Civil War jokes, and I would have a contraction every time they'd have a punchline. So I never really got to laugh as much as they did. So I never did use the mask. And then the baby was born in short order. The baby was born in 20 minutes. And it's a really good thing that I didn't go on up the mountain to do that. So then he called his sister to come on in because they wanted some help. I mean, these are two drunk guys, and now they've got a woman sitting in there who's just had a baby, and they wanted it to be cleaned up. And of course, they weren't going to do that. And his sister was a nurse, and she worked with him regularly. So he called her in, and I could hear her fussing and fuming when she came in the front door. "What's all this blood? Who made this big mess out here?" And I was just horrified. So I got up off of that table, and I remember I handed my baby to my husband, and I went on over there and cleaned up that foyer of that mess. And then I said, "You give me my baby." And I took my baby, and I got back in the pickup truck, and we drove the other 30 plus miles and then bumped back across the river. Now the moon was out. It was glorious. There was a full moon, I remember. And it was wonderful. And then I got home safe and sound and got in bed, and we built the fire. And it was wonderful then. It was wonderful then. But what that taught me was that there was no midwife at that time close by. There was nobody, and that's why we were having our babies and having to go to the hospital. But I made a decision then to study midwifery and help the other moms that were in my same situation. Mm-hmm. And then, I can share some of those other stories at another time. But that was, I became sensitized to the fact that, because in the old days, there were midwives. There were midwives all over the place, or at least 2 or 3. My own grandmother, this is interesting, after I had delivered my baby, then I went back and, told my family about, my experience. And my own grandmother was a midwife, and I didn't know that. Wow. And I never would have known that. And she was a midwife in South Carolina. Wow. And so that was a neat thing.
Yeah, it is.
That it turned out that, I got to, and I think I only delivered about 14 babies. It wasn't a big deal because there wasn't a big population out there. And then I worked with the doctor when I did, and he was my backup. Since
do we have time for another birthing story?
Oh, yes. Give me another one.
We talked about Dr. Billingsley a long time ago, one of these programs, Dr. Billingsley from Monterey. And we all knew him and loved him. He was a good man, and he's cherished. He's in my heart.
Yeah.
I had one experience with Dr. I.
Oh,
one
really?
Experience. There was a couple They were, I won't say their names because I don't know the outcome of the stories, but they were fugitives from the law. And they stayed with me in the teepee for a while. They lost their first baby when they came to Highland County. And they very soon became pregnant with their second baby. And they stayed with me for, I don't know how long it was, but it was good.
They stayed in the teepee.
They needed a place. Yes, they needed a place.
Good thing you had a big teepee.
Well, it was 19 feet tall in the center, 20 feet long
I know.
inside. You could walk around. You could dance in it.
Wow.
Actually, I used to dance in it, you know.
Yeah.
But anyway, the time came, they got rented a trailer in the trailer park that sits between where you and Billsy lived and Franklin. There was a trailer park
Yes, there was.
there.
And I remember that trailer park down by the river.
Down by the river.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they got a trailer there. And in due time, you know, her belly got bigger and bigger and bigger, but they were fugitives and didn't know what to do. So I suggested, why don't you buy a book called Lamaze? I've heard about that you can do a home birth. And they both said, okay, get us the book, but you got to be here where you have to show us. I said, I've never had a baby. I can't show you how to have a baby. I said, we don't care. But I got the book for them. And we went through the breathing lessons. We went through all the lessons. Everything went as planned. When time came, she went into labor. There were the complications of labor because it would hurt and she would vocalize the pain.
Right.
And her husband would get excited and she would say, shut up and get out of here. Leave me alone. I'm having this. Because he wanted to go to the hospital. He wanted to go to Dr.
Because it's scary for a man. It's scary for a woman.
Yes. And it was scary for me because I never did this before.
I'm sure it was.
So, but Pat said, I'm having this baby and I'm going to have it here.
Wow.
Just help me. I was like, you got it. You got it.
Wow.
So we went through it, had the baby. I didn't know how to cut the cord. I'm not a midwife.
Right.
And I said, well, why don't you guys call the doctor? He can come cut the cord, register the birth, et cetera, et cetera.
Uh-huh.
Well, half hour later, who walks in?
Doctor?
Your doctor.
Wow.
And he was so mad because they had a baby
That's right.
in a trailer down by the river and never had the pre thing. What do you call that? Those appointments to make sure you have a well baby.
That's correct. I'm having a hard time coming up with it myself. It's a simple.
It's our age.
Pre-birth. It's our age.
It's our age. Chalk it up to age, folks.
Yeah, the audience is going to have to understand.
That's right.
But we all get it. We know what we're talking about.
But he was upset. And for me, I didn't have the baby and I wasn't the dad. But I shouldn't say this because I'm sure he has family left. But he ruined a beautiful occasion for those people because he was rude to this couple.
I got you. Oh.
And why didn't you come? Why did you do this? You shouldn't have done this. I'm going to and et cetera, et cetera. And of course, her husband, I won't say the name.
Yeah, right.
He was ready to hit the dude. He said, he looked at me and said, I'm going to smack him. I said, no, don't,
right.
Let him go,
get him out,
and everything will be happy again. Well, he finally left and they took care of their baby. Their baby grew. They lived in Highland County and Pendleton County for 2 or 3 years. And they've gone. I don't know where they've gone. I've tried to find them.
Right.
Because that baby is special to me.
Yeah, I bet so.
And I have a picture of them sitting on the sofa with holding a newborn.
Yeah, that's a precious memory.
Yes, it is.
That is
I'm
a real
glad you had time
memory.
to put that one in.
Well, I'll tell you another one real quick. All right, so I was a midwife and I did work with Dr. Billingsley, and he knew that I was going out on this one birth because it looked like it was going to be really hard. She had no front teeth. She was from the Salt Flats of Utah, and her husband was a drunk alcoholic who had finished his job at the dam when they were closing it down. And she, and he was on the couch all the time. And I walked into her house, and her refrigerator only had white bread and some Pepsi, and she smoked 2 packs of cigarettes a day. So I walked on in, and I used to bring her food every time I would come, and she had a little 2-year-old running around in diapers with her. And and I would give her these exams until it got very, very close time for the baby to be born. And we had tried to nourish her with alfalfa sprouts and all sorts of and vitamins and all sorts of stuff. But when I got there she notified us that she needed, to have this baby, and I came on, and I had my oxygen tank with my birthing bag, and I had an infant mask and a mask for her, and I didn't know if I was going to need it or not, but I said, of all the babies I delivered, this one's going to be the most trouble. And so when I walked on in, and the husband was drunk, and there she was having this baby, we laid her down, and it turns out she had double pneumonia, and she could hardly breathe, and she was so weak that she couldn't, the contraction, she was making no progress. So I said to the husband, get off of this couch and come on in here and get under this woman. We stood her up, and it's an Indian way of giving birth. Just let gravity do its work, because she couldn't contribute anything. And so he was holding her up, and I got under her, and we caught this baby. And do you know that was the most beautiful baby of any of the ones that I delivered? We did what's called an APGAR score, which is a way of scoring the immediate health and reflexes of a baby.
Yeah.
And he had pink cheeks. He was 10 pounds, this baby. It was a 10-pound baby. And at that point, and she still couldn't breathe. And I ended up calling the hospital and having an ambulance come, not for the baby. The birth was done. The birth was fine. But she had to go to the hospital because she couldn't breathe. And so then we, packed her off. And then off she went. But that was a real lesson, too, of how God operates behind the scenes.
Yes.
For that baby to have been healthy was against all odds.
Yes.
And I mean, he was perfectly formed and was absolutely beautiful.
Well, he couldn't have had a better person attending that birth than you.
Well, it was good that I was willing to do something sort of, you have to get creative in these situations.
Yeah.
And to stand her up and let that baby just drop naturally, because then she hardly had to push at all. And she didn't have any push left in her anyway. But that husband was a mess. They just took her, and he just stayed on the couch. He just,
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, so there were some wonderful tales. We did, I do know that I was able to help people out there in the mountains during that time. And there were some other tales, and all of them were very, very good. That was the one that came closest to the wire.
Mm-hmm.
That I thought might be bad, but it wasn't. Well, we're coming to the end, Tony. I hope you're going to have more stories the next time we get together, because I'm thinking that we're going to run this series right up until Christmas, so you'll get to hear more from Tony. But thank you so much, Tony.
Well, it's such a blessing to share these stories, and there are more stories. And remember, folks, in Radio Land,
we'll talk to you. We'll
all
talk
right.
to you. Over and out, Tony.
Over and out.
All right, bye, sweetie. You've been listening to Front Porch Tales, courtesy of Crowning Touch Senior Moving Services of Roanoke, Virginia, the only moving company with a consignment shop, auction house, and real estate division. We are a one-stop shop for any senior making a move. Check out our website at crowningtouchusa.com. Or if you are planning a move, call Anna at 540-982-5800 to arrange a free estimate. Our consignment shop is open Tuesday through Saturday, and we accept items on appointment and offer pickup and delivery. And don't forget to check out our monthly browse and bid auctions at 6712 Williamson Road, Roanoke, where you can bid online on over 1,700 items each month. Meanwhile, let's get back together next Friday at noon for more Appalachian Tales from the Front Porch on Fox 910 and 104.3.